Se-roi calls the new owner of Danbam's location to negotiate the raised rent, and his smile vanishes as President Jang cackles back over the line. President Jang coyly denies any motives beyond a good business investment. He invites Se-roi to visit Jang Ga HQ tomorrow and hangs up. Turning back to his Danbam crew, Se-roi confirms that Jang Ga is responsible. Iso rails on Suwa for shamelessly borrowing Danbam's ice. He warns her not to say anything more, and Iso snatches Suwa's ice bucket on her way out of the pub. Iso grinds the ice beneath her boots before storming off down the street. Inside, Gunsu offers to fetch her while Suwa takes her leave. Se-roi apologizes for Iso's outburst, and Suwa comments that he and Iso are awfully close. She agrees with Iso, saying she feels too bad to borrow ice and leaves. The next day, Se-roi pays President Jang a visit at Jang Ga HQ. President Jang suggests Se-roi sell the building quickly in order to secure the premium Danbam racked up. He warns that the Lease Protection Act won't save Danbam, as President Jang can basically do whatever he wants. President Jang adds that he could even complain about the wall they busted down. Se-roi asks what he does want. President Jang orders Se-roi to release Gunsu, and Se-roi retorts that Gunsu's decision. He sneers that Gunsu called Se-roi strong, and that he plans to show Gunsu what real strength is. President Jang is aware of Se-roi's tenacity and vows to buy every building Se-roi tries to set up business in. Is that your definition of power? This all started because Se-roi was too stubborn to get on his knees. What would I get for ruining your life? President Jang asks and says the way to fix the situation is for Se-roi to correct his behavior and kneel. Se-roi asks if kneeling will mean he can continue his business. He promises to put the past behind them and stop taking things from Se-roi. What I want out of this fight isn't money, because I am your enemy. He explains that the day he got expelled, Dad told him he was proud. Se-roi scoffs, "You took absolutely nothing from me." He says that power comes from people because their trust gives him strength. President Jang sneers that if Danbam fails, Se-roi will lose his people, but Se-roi counters that they're the reason he can continue to run it. He turns to go, and President Jang calls out this was his last chance and that he'll regret it. Turning back, Se-roi says there's only one way their ill-fated relationship ends, with President Jang kneeling and receiving punishment for his sins. On his way out, Se-roi runs into Suwa. He tells her he met President Jang and Danbam will have to move. "I'm just upset my plan to make you quit is going to take longer than expected." He smiles. Se-roi leaves, saying he'll see her later in Itaewon. Gunsu catches up to Iso on their way to work, but she's salty at the Jang family and shuts him down. Frustrated, Gunsu demands she explain, and Iso agrees. By the time they arrive at work, everyone is already there. Suwa approaches President Jang in his office to ask about the acquisition of Danbam's location. He warns her he's in a bad mood, but she pushes ahead, saying he's acting out of character. Even when his choices defied social custom, it was all for the good of the company. This, however, seems like an emotional decision. President Jang silences her and kicks her out of his office. Recalling Se-roi's parting words, President Jang wonders if he really considers that little kid his enemy. Over drinks, Sungkwan excitedly tells Tony the story of his and Se-roi's first fight while Hyunhee grumbles that he's told it a million times. Se-roi notices Iso and Gunsu's sour expressions, but Iso denies they fought. Sungkwan waves it off, saying they fight all the time and suggests going clubbing for round 2. Hyunhee snickers that he must have had a lot of fun last time, and Sungkwan shushes her. Having never been clubbing, Se-roi asks if it's fun, and Sungkwan jumps up to give him a lesson. He starts Iso's spiel about smiling and announcing your presence, but when he moves close, Se-roi tells him to sit down. As they make their way to the club, Sungkwan continues the lesson for Tony, and Se-roi sends them all ahead so he can have a word with Gunsu. Once they're alone, Gunsu admits Iso spilled the beans and asks why Se-roi never told him. Se-roi replies that it's between him and Gunwon and President Jang. In turn, Se-roi asks why Gunsu came to work for him. Gunsu shrugs that he wanted money, but Se-roi says it looked like he needed someone to lean on. Se-roi, "I thought Danbam, and I might be able to give you something to lean on." Gunsu bristles at being pitted, but Se-roi insists he merely sees himself in Gunsu. Gunsu apologizes for his family and swears that they'll pay. Se-roi just pulls him into a hug. The rest of Danbam enters the club, but while the girls and Sungkwan easily gain access, the bouncer turns Tony away, declaring citizens from Africa and the Middle East aren't welcome. Tony cheerfully replies that he's Korean, but the bouncer calls for security when Tony doesn't produce his passport. Hyunhee and Sungkwan leap to Tony's defense, but Iso suggests they just leave. Tony desperately insists that he's Korean, but Iso rudely points out he has dark skin. Tearing up, Tony calls her on being mean and runs out. Just arriving, Se-roi calls after him. Iso matter-of-factly says that the club doesn't accept Africans. She says the owner has a right to refuse service and sighs that Tony got all upset when she didn't side with him. Se-roi is startled and warns Iso that she's been getting on his nerves since yesterday. She just pouts that Tony isn't Korean. The next morning, Iso, Hyunhee, and Sungkwan smirk at the graffiti emblazoned on the club's entrance, calling them out for being racist. Meanwhile, Se-Roi meets with Ho-jin and turns down Ho-jin's suggestion that he invest rather than reopen Dambam. Ho-jin points out that President Jang will continue to buy up every building they rent. Handing his phone to Ho-jin, Se-Roi says there's a way. He plans to call Min-young that afternoon and apologizes to Ho-jin. Over at Dambam, Gun-soo arrives first and starts setting up. The rest of the crew arrive, and he asks to speak with Iso. He tells her that he plans to return home in exchange for President Jang to leave Dambam be. To his disappointment, Iso just smiles. She'd be grateful if he did. She continues to grin, even as he tells her she's mean. While waiting for the bus, Gun-soo thinks back to the night she used him as a dummy to teach Sungkwan clubbing etiquette and smiles ruefully. Se-Roi meets with Min-young, and she asks if he needs to borrow money. Se-Roi wants to withdraw half of his investment in Janga. She points out he'll lose any influence in the company, saying she thought Ho-jin would convince him to help her instead. Min-young wonders why he's risking so much for a tiny pub that President Jang can easily take away. Se-Roi says the pub is all about the people he works with. Back at work, the rest of the team worries that they haven't heard from Tony. Sungkwan urges Iso to apologize, but she doesn't bother to look up. Suwa arrives to return beer that she borrowed and Iso glowers at her. They're joined by Se-Roi and Iso announces that Gun-soo has something to say. Gun-soo awkwardly says he wants to quit, denying there's a reason. Se-Roi asks him to stay if this is about his family, adding, "I like you. You're like my younger brother." Iso pipes up that Gun-soo promised to barter with President Jang to secure Dambam's location. She said that moving will cost a lot of money and they can easily run the pub without Gun-soo. Turning on her, Se-Roi asks her opinion, and when Iso supports the idea, he rips off her name tag. Se-Roi tells Iso she doesn't deserve to be Dambam's manager and shuts Suwa down when she tries to intervene. Iso argues that he'll never beat Jang Jie if he insists on treating Dambam like family rather than a business. Se-Roi snaps that if all that matters is profit, he won't do business. "If I were to become like him, I wouldn't have started this." Iso tearfully shouts that she doesn't want him to get kicked out and suffer a loss. Se-Roi counters that it's only natural for his enemy to attack him. "What makes me upset now," he shouts, "is you whom I thought was on my side." Iso sniffles that she only said it for his sake, but Se-Roi can't understand why she needs to fire someone he cares about for that. "I bet my life on you. You have to take responsibility. I need a realistic alternative." Her words echo what Min-young had told him earlier. He had explained that's the reason he's retrieving his investment in Jang Jie, to protect his people. He'd vowed not to be swayed by President Jang anymore. In the present, Iso accuses him of not having an alternative and Se-Roi declares he'll buy a building. Calling it the realistic alternative, he leaves. Iso doesn't believe him, but Suwa points out Se-Roi never lies. Turning to the younger woman, Suwa asks her to talk. The women relocate, and despite Iso's prickly demeanor, Suwa says she wants to help. Iso growls at her to butt out of Danbam's business, but Suwa wants to talk about Se-Roi. She recalls Iso declared she liked Se-Roi and wonders whether she'd still like him if he were a sly guy who was a more practical businessman. Suwa explains that for Se-Roi, it only counts when he proves himself using the opposite methods of President Jang. Suwa admits it's hard, both for Se-Roi and the ones watching, but she insists that no one can change him. She tells Iso that to be on his side, she shouldn't try to change him, but support him. Iso sniffs that Suwa understands him well, but Suwa says she's not on his side precisely because she doesn't. Iso's suspicious of Suwa's motives. She maintains her confidence in Se-Roi's feelings, and Iso snidely reminds Suwa she hates her. "Keep your chin up, cutie." Iso considers Suwa's words as she walks back. She recalls Se-Roi's abhorrence of bowing to others despite making life easier and his confidence in Hyuni. Stopping at the corner to see the bouncer and his men scrubbing Se-Roi's graffiti, she smiles to herself that she likes him. Iso takes off at a run and finds Gun-soo outside his apartment. She gruffly apologizes, and when Gun-soo doesn't react, she admits he must be mad and cheekily asks what she should do. Gun-soo says he's not mad, but Iso is unconvinced, agreeing that she was heartless. He points out she's always been heartless, inconsiderate, and selfish. "But I like you the way you are." Iso confesses she's in love with Se-Roi and is apologizing because she wants to stay with him. She tells Gun-soo to stay out of her way and skips off while he stares sullenly after her. Tony is at the district office the next day, and Tony thrusts forward an adorable photo of him and his father when he was young. The clerk sighs that a picture isn't proof of paternity and implores Tony to return with his family certificate. Meanwhile, the rest of the Dambam crew read Iso's latest social media post bashing the club for discriminating against Tony based on his skin color. Iso arrives at work and admits to the post, pointing out Se-Roi said messing with his people was like messing with him. "So I made up my mind, I'll just kill those who mess with you." She asks where Tony is, and Hyuni suggests Iso call him. Just as she dials, Tony arrives and he asks Iso about the post, arguing that he is Korean. Everyone sighs when she counters that he doesn't look Korean, asking why he insists that he is. Tony reveals that his dad came to Korea to meet his mother, and that as soon as he finds him, Tony can acquire Korean nationality. Iso points out that he hasn't acquired it yet, and so he's not Korean. Iso continues that she'll help Tony find his dad. She apologizes for not siding with him, and Tony sniffles, feigning a stomachache. Smiling like a proud papa, Se-Roi reaches out to pat her head, but Iso demands her name tag back first. Her eyes widen when he immediately produces it from his pocket, and she insists he put it on her. He does, and Hyun-hee and Sungkwan high-five. Iso pouts that it's hard dealing with Se-Roi, and he grins as he pats her head. Gun-soo arrives just then and looks up at them sadly. President Jang's assistant informs him a new tenant has moved into Dambam's location, suggesting President Jang by wherever Se-Roi moved to as well. President Jang asks his assistant, who reports that Se-Roi bought a building. Across town, the crew busily sets up the new location while Tony hands out flyers. A woman warns them that all the businesses that take up that building fail and hands them her card. She's a loan shark. Min-young meets with Se-Roi, who apologizes for causing her trouble by removing his investment, and that her challenge had been for him to rankle President Jang, which he did. When he confirms he still wants Min-young's help, she says they should have a shared goal. She wonders if revenge is all Se-Roi wants, and he says after that, he'd like freedom. I want my words to have power so no one can mess with me and my people. He tells her he wants to live a life where he can make his own decisions and not have to pay for his principles. She chuckles that he's an idealist but accepts his goal and proposes they enjoy that freedom together. President Jang recalls Se-Roi's assertion that President Jang had stolen nothing from him. As I grow older, I'm becoming pettier, he tells Gun-won. The next morning, Soo-ah meets up with Se-Roi and muses that she's not even surprised he's become a building owner. He admits he's been told he picked a bad location, but she notes that doesn't look concerned. Se-Roi smiles that he believes in his people. Soo-ah admits she's jealous of how much he cares for them. Iso in particular. On your way to make me unemployed, Soo-ah clarifies, you need her, right? A visitor arrives at Jang JHQ. It hasn't been long since she came, Se-Roi finally answers, a smile spreading across his face, but I can't imagine Dambam without Yizio. The doors open and Iso strides into President Jang's office.